Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Art Evolution. I'm Christopher Talbot, the president and founder, and tonight is our first exhibition featuring Toller Cranston, A Terrifying Obsession. If I could ask everybody to please turn off your cell phones because we are recording this evening. When we decided to put this presentation on, I spoke with Toller and I said, you know, we have to come up with something pretty catchy about what we should call this presentation and how it will play to people, and something that encapsulates who you are and what you're all about. And we very quickly came up with A Terrifying Obsession, which was Toller's words. So we decided to go with that, and that is a very precise analogy of how this man lives his life in the creation of not only art, but all of his artistic endeavours. Tonight, we are showcasing approximately 2 years of work. We are showcasing museum-sized artworks that have never been seen in North America. These artworks are normally bought by collectors directly from Toller in San Miguel, and very rarely are they seen outside of Mexico. They are enormously expensive to ship, and when you see the size of them, you'll understand the problems in just getting them here to Canada. We have the biggest collection that we've ever showcased. We've done a number of exhibitions with Toller before, and this by far and away is the most exciting one that I've had the pleasure of presenting. For those of you that know about Toller, he doesn't really need a lot of introduction. As a Canadian icon, he was revered as a figure skater. He is, and will always, in my opinion, be the most famous figure skater in history. He reinvented that sport, that artistic application that he applied was the first time ever. He was ahead of the curve. And what most people don't know about Toller is that his entire skating career was financed through the sale of his artworks. For anybody that understands figure skating, you will know that that is a full-time endeavour. It is a solid commitment with very little room to do anything else, and yet he was able to accomplish the amazing things he did in the skating, but also finance it through the sale of his artworks. The thing that I focus on as someone that's in the art business is the true value and the correctness of the artworks. We've had the luxury of representing some very famous artists around the world, and everybody in this room knows an artist, I'm sure. Most people know a lot of artists. Basically anybody that can hold a pencil or a paintbrush or a chisel will call themselves an artist. There are millions and millions and millions of artists in the world. There are only literally a handful, I would venture to say less than 1%, that make a living full-time as an artist. So how do you really determine value? How do you determine what is correct, what is authentic? So as a marketer, I look at things very simplistically, and I break it down into 3 criteria that I use to establish the artist that I wish to represent. The first thing that I look at is the artwork unique? Can you drive past the artwork at 50 miles an hour and say that's a Picasso, or that's a Chagall, or is that a Toller Cranston, or is it, you know, a Van Gogh? I mean, all of those artists are very distinct. It's the holy grail in terms of what artists are trying to accomplish in their careers, in their lives. I've often said that the creation of art is the highest appreciation of the human condition. It is something that everybody aspires to do in some form or fashion. Very few ever accomplish. The things that I look for is the artwork unique? Well, Toler Cranston's artwork is completely distinctive. You know a Toler Cranston the moment you look at it. The other thing I want to know, especially when you start speaking about investment quality artworks, is does the artist have a history? I mean, is this artist really have a history? Is there any dialogue behind this person? Do I Google this person and find a couple of mentions, or are there tens of thousands of entries? Toller Cranston has completed over 250 exhibitions, which is beyond extraordinary. It's almost a handful of artists probably on the planet that have ever been able to do that. Picasso painted 2,000 paintings in his lifetime and was revered as one of the most prolific and most sought after artists of his time. Toler Cranston has painted over 5,000 paintings and sold every single one of them around the world. So I look at, does the art sell? Does the man have a history? And is the artwork unique? It is this extremely difficult criteria that I focus on in terms of representing artists, especially when I'm looking at a buyer and telling them that you're buying something of value. What you're seeing tonight is rare. I suggest that you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. It's not often you'll see a collection like this. It represents 2 years of dedicated work. I'm very proud to present Toler Cranston, and I hope you enjoy this evening.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, all you people, for being in this room tonight. I must say, I don't know how anyone even found this building. It's not exactly Main Street, but anyway, I'm here. And I also wanted to say that last night I arrived, unlike any tourist or newcomer to Calgary, on a plane that arrived at 2:30 in the morning. And I had been traveling for 24 hours, so I'm really happy that you're here, and I'm really happy that I'm here. Because there were times, thanks to United Airlines, where it was really up in the air as to whether I would be able to come or not. But anyway, I am here. I wanted to quickly also say, figure skaters and athletes that have represented Canada over years and years and years and years, figure skating is probably being the most dominant in that department, because our careers go on past the amateur to entertainment. Kurt Browning, you certainly would know about. But I have really a rather long history with Calgary, and would have, I think at the age of 13, come to Calgary by myself to compete in the first figure skating event, Canadian Championships, at the Corral. You may remember that. And so that started at the 13. Would have seen the Palliser Hotel when it wasn't the Fairmount. Would have won the Worlds years later at the Corral. Was the first skater, nobody knows this, I was dazzling somebody the other day, that I was the first skater to ever put blades on in the Saddle Dome, because I did a concert with the Olympic Festival, and the Saddle Dome had just been built, and I was the first skater to have actually put the blades on in the Saddle Dome, and then Stars on Ice, which you would know in my own show. Anyway, the list goes on and on and on, but that's not why I'm here. I wanted to tell you a smidge about the kind of odyssey and narrative of my skating life, just in an anecdotal way, and I really do tend to ramble on far too long, but I wanted to tell you about the beginning, the middle, and the end of the skating, the art, the terrible obsession, which I keep threatening to expose, and also what is learned from all of it. What does one learn from that experience? When I was a little boy, this is true, my father moved to Kirkland Lake, but we lived in this bedroom community which was called Swastika, Ontario. They changed the name, but many thought it was the last stand of the Nazis. It wasn't. It was an Indian name. And at 7 years of age, my mother was told by me that I should like to become a ballet dancer at the age of 7. This is really most unusual for any 7-year-old in Swastika, or really at that time, which was in the early 50s. I was taken to the basement of the Fireman's Hall to study dance, and my career lasted 30 seconds because I thought you danced around and expressed yourself to music, when in fact what you did was did pliés and exercise at the bar, something academic and everything that I'm not. On that very same year, we went with my sister, to the carnival. They have this in Canada, the wind-up carnival at the end of the year, and sitting up in the bleachers within the building, I said to my mother, it's not dancing that I want, it's that. That was figure skating. And I would have sort of discovered it by myself. We then moved, that's where I started. We then moved to Galt, Ontario, and something again which was prophetic that happened. I had to compete in the club competitions against the president's son. He had a choreographed skating routine, and I just went out and expressed myself to music. The audience thought I should have won, but in fact I didn't. The president's son won. That was interesting because that was a history and a pattern that was to repeat itself for my entire life. Growing up in the suburbs of Montreal, how one perceives world or Olympic competition when you're young is different than perhaps how I perceive it now, although it ends up to the same point. It's really hard to represent the country, any country, on an Olympic level because the standard is so high. But I had a sort of predilection about wanting to make the Olympic team. And I was going to art school at the time, École des Beaux-Arts, which was a French-speaking university in Montreal. I was, I think, 16. And all I really wanted to do was make the Olympics, but boys or anyone from the province of Quebec, all of this has changed, would never make the Olympics because all the judges came from Toronto. Many of you would know about the Granite Club and the Cricket Club, and you have the Glencoe, and that meant all the judges came from those places. Anyway, how I managed to get into condition in 1968 wasn't really through skating, but going from the university next door and running up 30 flights of stairs every lunch hour, of which I do remember I passed out the first time I did it. Nevertheless, I went to the Canadian Championships in Vancouver in 1968, and going into the long program, I was fourth. And then something really, it's probably the most dramatic thing that's ever happened in my life, which was at the the final day, which was a Sunday. I skated last in the whole afternoon. The Olympic team had already been sort of ordained, and so I skated, and for the first time in years I was in condition, and skated quite fantastically, and caused a kind of sensation. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is that out of the mayhem, this woman came and grabbed me, and I didn't know who she was, and I was 16, and the tears were sort of coming down, and she said, you know, they don't know what they saw. You're really very far ahead of your time. They didn't understand, and I'm sort of agreeing. Well, anyways, I found out that person was Ellen Burka. Ellen Burka is a world famous coach and 35 Canadian champions, 5 Olympic and 5 world. And that summer, I had ground into post that 68 Olympic trial. I was the groundskeeper at the Mirror Lake Inn in Lake Placid, getting fatter and fatter by the second. Because I didn't get any money, I just got food. And then in September, when all the summer skaters had gone home, I didn't know what to do. I was stymied, flummoxed, confused. And I stood in the lobby of the Lake Placid Olympic Arena that bleak September day and looked up in the phone book or asked information for the number of Mrs. Ellen Burka in Toronto, and phoned her up and I said, "Hi, Mrs. Burka, this is Toller Cranston. Do you know who I am?" She said, "Yeah, sort of, kind of." I said, "Would you teach me?" Well, in those days, you really had to ask permission because they had other important skaters and competition. Anyway, she said, "Well, phone me back tomorrow and I'll let you know if I can teach you." She phoned back, and as history would dictate years later, they all laughed and said, "Well, he's so fat and out of condition, we really don't care if you teach him or not." So I embarked with my father from the Doorbell train station, that's Montreal, with $50 in my pocket, my skates and my paints. I might also add, never to return, ever. But I went to the cricket club, and in the first week, it was very difficult, and far more than the Glencoe. It was extremely elitist and difficult and very wasp. Anyway, I went to Ellen Burka's house with my little bags at 16 and said, "Look, I'm really not made for this. I'm not cut out for this. This isn't me. I'm going to go back to Montreal and become the artist that I'm destined to become." And she said, "Well, this is unprecedented, but you may come and live in my furnace room for 1 week. And just give it one more try." And this is the most fantastic thing. I came and lived beside the flaming furnace for 1 week, stayed for 12 years, became 3 times world champion, and that's so interesting because our lives can change in a second with a word, a sentence, a meeting, an opportunity, an experience. I became different than the other Canadian champions, much more known outside the country. And one other anecdote that I'll just share with you is that I had been asked by the Russian Figure Skating Association to go over and not compete in a competition, this would be prior to '76, but rather just to exhibit. And the Soviet Union, which is what it was then, now after Perestroika it's free, but at that time it was the evil empire. And I went over there, and instead of competing, I skated at 11 o'clock at night in the Luzhniki Sports Palace with the 20,000 people, and actually caused a kind of sensation. And instead of the sleeping audience, so late at night on a Monday night, I stayed on the ice, and I think I did 10 encores and was on the ice for 3/4 of an hour. That was pivotal because that was the moment that changed the perception of me, both within Europe, the world, and certainly Canada, because in a way Canada really didn't know what to do with me. But the Russian president, a man whose name was Mr. Pisayev, how do I remember that? But I do, said to Ellen Burka, "Well, we do know that your pupil's the best skater in the world, but you do understand he can never win. You must understand that." And at that time, different than today, the Soviet Union was a block of countries, so you might have had in the 9 judges that were judging you at the Olympics, 5 of them emanated from the Soviet Union, and if you didn't toe the party line, you ended up in the gulags in Siberia if you were a judge. That was 75. In 76, that was the big year, and that was what I was that was when I was really supposed to win. And those Olympics were in Innsbruck. But then the most terrible thing happened, quite the worst you can imagine. Just at the moment critique, I lost interest in skating. I didn't want to be judged by people that were there only because of seniority and not because of knowledge. And I did my best and tried, but I just, as the Americans say, wasn't into it. when I returned home with a tawdry bronze medal, I remember the customs guy in Toronto airport said, "Oh, Cranston, you really blew it." And I wanted to say, you know, I was lucky to come out with anything, because I could have run out screaming into the parking lot with my skates. One other funny thing that happened, this is the thing that saved me, this is the reason I got a bronze medal. The guy who won, his name was John Curry, a British, and he skated right before me, and in this very congested little corridor going to the rink in Innsbruck, the British fans all amalgamated in that corridor and were blocking me and saying he's won, he's won, he's won, and even I knew that he had won because this is before me because of all the marks. And I kept saying, "Excuse me, could I get out onto the ice?" And the announcer was saying, "If Cranston doesn't get out on the ice, he'll be disqualified." I said, "You know, this isn't really fair because I don't really want to have 2 minutes before, like I'm supposed to do the Olympics, that my career ends because I can't get out onto the ice." And I started laughing. Trust me, that really saved me because it calmed me down, and truly he was far better than me. And I skated, and the interesting thing was that he was 3 inches higher than me on the podium, and I was 2 inches lower, and his life had climaxed, and mine was just beginning. He died 3 years later, and I went on for another 25 years trying to prove myself. Now we're going to talk about art. When I was a little boy, in grade 2 in Galt, Ontario, now Cambridge, but then Galt, we were told in the class to do a kind of abstract design, and it was, if I can describe this, black lines crossing each other, and then you color the areas between the back lines in different colors. Well, everybody in the class was the same, and mine was like purple, fuchsia, and turquoise, and looked sort of like a paisley design. And the teacher said, "You know, yours is really the most unique in the class, but we can't exhibit it with the other kids, and you can't get up on the wall because you're too different." Once again, that chorus, which began then, was something that I had to endure for 64 years. With eventually going from grade school to high school, I went I was one of 2 boys in the art class in grade 8, because guys did industrial arts and sawed planks and hammered nails, and I went into the art class, and the art teacher, Mr. Dodge, said, "You're trying to be too unusual, you're trying to be too different," and I got a detention and failed art in grade 8. Years later, he wrote me a very laudatory letter saying that I was his greatest pupil, his greatest student. I understood that, and I also understand that anything out of the box, anything against the grain, anything different, it does take time for people to understand these things. Something which was very pivotal, going back kind of to the skating, is that when I didn't make the Olympic team in '68, Ellen Burke said, "Why don't we, in order for you to make money to pay for your skating, why don't you have an exhibition in my house, and then we'll invite everyone we know and see what happens." I did that. And imagine this for all you entrepreneurial men and women out there. I went at 16 to a bank in St. Anne de Bellevue and told the bank manager, "Could you please lend me $2,000 because I have to have it for frames for my painting exhibition?" And he said yes. $2,000 at that time was kind of a lot of money. And I had the exhibition. Ellen Burke, quite miraculously, also exhibited her paintings, and all the furniture was removed. We invited every person that we knew and many that we didn't. And they came over, and I sold everything I did. It was interesting with that exhibition, because really, Christopher said 250, but I think there have really been 500. I knew with that very first exhibition that it was the highlight of my artistic life, because there would be no high and no experience more satisfying than selling everything that you do with first out of the blocks. And it is true, I was able to, in an unprecedented way, pay for my skating career. I do know that, and we love and adore Kurt, but he didn't, Elvis didn't, Brian Pokar didn't, Brian Orser didn't, Gary Beacom didn't, and Patrick Cham doesn't. But that was the way that I was able to support myself, and figure skating also became, although not in the medal department, a huge privilege, because I was able to see the world and experience museums and countries and cultures that normal kids or teenagers would never have the opportunity to do. That became the education, the formal education, that I did not have. Now we're going to talk about the obsession. Each person in their lives hopefully one day will know who they are and what they are and where they fit. The artist, the fabric of the artist is quite a different species of human being. If you're one, you know what I'm talking about, and if you're not one, you don't. But the level of sensitivity for the artist is so extreme that every tiny little thing that could go wrong or could be said is like a harpoon that goes through your heart. The artist, and this is not being melodramatic, but suffers often more than anybody because you feel more than other people normally feel. Normal things that wouldn't affect you, an insult, a rejection, a disappointment, becomes monumental, and you live with that every day of your life. One of the most terrible things, it's a privilege and also a horror, is the concept of obsessive compulsiveness, which is you can't stop doing what you feel most passionately about doing. And even today, imagine, I am unable to tear myself away from the studio work because it is always demanding, kind of like petulant children that need to be babysat. You can't just let it go. And as I walk out of my studio, I think a couple of times they showed that up there. I walk out looking at the paintings, and the paintings are telling you, come and fix me, come and work with me. So you leave every day, never satisfied, but sort of tormented by the fact that you haven't done enough. Another thing that some people may not be able to relate to, but this is what I think, is in my life, the pain and sort of confusion and depression, shall I say, is never about what you have done, what you've accomplished. It's always about what you haven't done, what you should have done. And the sense of, or the lack of self-worth, is omnipresent and actually haunts you day and night, because you are never satisfied with who and what you are. Most artists, many that I know, 700 live in San Miguel, when push comes to shove and you're going to sort of talk one-on-one, the artist cannot have really a family, any kind of relationship, any significant other. You are married to your work. That is who your wife and husband and whatever is. It's your work. And so by doing what you want to do and being very creative, you also have to know that your life and your life's journey will always be spent alone, because the complete and total dedication and all emotions go into the work. I might also say that to fight off this unusual and secret life, privilege as it is being creative and doing what you want to do, there are all sorts of black clouds on the horizon: substance abuse, alcoholism, depressions, bipolar. I'm admitting to nothing but read the writing on the wall. There have been problems, and you deal with what you deal with just to work another day, just to be creative another day. I really can't stand saying that I'm 64. It's most embarrassing. And when people say the Olympics in '76, it's like 40 years ago, or oh my God, how could it have all gone so quickly? But there are some things which I have gleaned and some things that I have learned over my life. One is, this is so important, we, me, you, must embrace failure as your friend. It is only through failure that you learn. You don't really learn through success. And there's a sort of an axiom like, if the poison doesn't kill you, it's good for you. We learn from failure, we learn from disappointments. Another thing which is so important, again, you learn it, is the failure, disappointments, terrible things that happen either within your family, within your profession, within your relationships, within your economic situation. The negative, clever people can turn it to a positive. An example of that would be, I really did hunger and lust for some kind of education. I wanted to be formally educated. I wanted to go to university, but then and today you cannot, because the demands are too great. So what I did, I took the negative and then self-educated. Saw things that other people didn't see, went to museums, read, visited, explored, tried to understand cultures, and I received doctorates from various universities 3 times. In a way, it's sort of justification because, wow, I didn't have an education, but I have 3 PhDs. That's not bad. This sounds a bit New Age, but I believe it, and I am very, very cognizant of trying to read the writing on the wall, trying to read the signs around you. This would include astrology, the tarot card, and numerology. You do not live your life by it, but smart people, which could go back to Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Admiral Nelson, the Reagans, and me. You read the signs and the temperature around you. Again, another point, so important. I feel that all of our lives are like a tapestry, a quilt, a handmade quilt. If the quilt is too beautiful and too pretty and too well appointed, it's limited. More interesting quilts are the quilts with flaws and beauty and ugliness at the same time, because that is the fabric and texture of your life. Far more interesting to have an unusual quilt with many different textures and colors than one that is just consistently perfect. And in closing, there's something that I remember so clearly, which is this dancer once, a female, and she used to teach at the cricket club, and her name was Patricia Beattie, and she came from a very blue-blood family in Rosedale, and she said to me, you know, in our lives, if we can light one match in somebody's head, inspire, illuminate, influence, then we are successful. Just one. And that has always stuck with me, and if I were to review my life, I think it's fair to say that I have lit at least one match. And that, against all the odds and all the failures and all the accomplishments and everything, that is what is important to me. Thank you very much. The other thing is, if you like, I mean, certainly, when we go in and see the exhibition, and thank you, Christopher and Keith and everybody, I'm there and happy to meet people that I don't know, and we'll get to know each other more personally, and I'll answer any question. And so please enjoy the evening, please enjoy the exhibition, and thank you for coming.